talk will follow on, I think, from the last papers, though perhaps inflect some of the issues that they've raised in a different way. Okay, I want to talk about politics. It's not news today to say that the question of what can be known and who can know and why it should be known must be central to our concern with the politics of markets. Those who defend the virtue of free markets, after all, have consistently derided the idea that anyone or any institution, let alone the state, could have sufficient knowledge to govern. The market is, in one formulation, is an extraordinarily effective information gathering device, constantly updated, correcting its errors without the need for peer review. Now, while those who critique the market point out with perhaps equal good reason that participants in the market know little of the system as a whole, and in particular a system in crisis. And it's also not news to say that the financial crisis has been, in part, perhaps above all, been about a crisis in knowledge and the politics of knowledge. We must attend to the knowledge produced and assessed by investors and credit rating agencies, regulators, market analysts, reporters of the financial markets, industry and academic commentators. And also to the importance of the generation of financial instruments, which were expected to work despite the lack of knowledge of the specificity of what they dealt with, whether it was weather or housing or the conditions in the Gulf of Mexico, and indeed the lack of widespread knowledge of how they actually worked. There's one very general thing I'd like to say about these various forms of knowledge. If capitalism is constantly in motion, constantly mutating, much of this knowledge, and this is really echoing what Karen has said, is not exactly about what is going on now, but an account of this movement, this mutation, of specific elements of it, reading the signs of the past to predict or model something of an evolving future, estimating risk, plotting strategy, informing of how we view the future in a way which folds back and how we act in the present. It's not about truth, as Paolo said, it's about a kind of action in motion. Now, it's fair to say that I think the limitations of the production of knowledge by this huge range of experts and agencies, what they could know, what they might have known, what they might have actually publicly made known, what they shouldn't or didn't make known, has been and continues and should continue to be at the center of the debate about the politics of contemporary capitalism. This was the case in different ways in relation to the case of Enron, in relation to the subprime mortgage market, and so on. But here I don't want to resolve this classical debate between the relative virtues of the market and the state as sources of knowledge, or rehearse the crude opposition between the systemic knowledge of the state, or the intellectual, or the political party, or the class, and the collective wisdom of the market. It strikes me there are now, as has been made clear in the last session, too many experts and indeed non-experts, too many different kinds of knowledge producers, too many different knowledge mediators, too many mediating institutions to think of the problem in those terms. I want to start with a concept. The concept I'm going to use is the concept of political situation. A characteristic feature of contemporary political situations, and by this I mean loosely contemporary political disputes and conflicts, is that they often revolve around the production of knowledge. Perhaps they always have, but they clearly more do so today. They revolve around the question of who produces knowledge, how knowledge is produced, and why knowledge is produced. Outside of the immediate debates about finance, think of the specific debates surrounding the Iraq War, or the question of the responsibility for Deepwater Horizon, or the question of the dynamics of climate change, its causes and consequences. All of these central political debates are also debates about the production and circulation of knowledge. And the financial crisis and its aftermath is a particular political situation of this kind. There have been and continue to be debates about the politics of the production of knowledge in a series of different ways. Now, what do I mean by a political situation which revolves around the production of knowledge? How can we think of this political situation which we're in today? First, while public controversies about what is known or not known are common enough, there's also likely to be controversy or disagreement about what such controversies are fundamentally about, or whether there's any controversy at all or several. One reason I think I want to use the term situation rather than controversy is that the notion of situation conveys, I think, a sense of the vagueness or fuzziness, to use Dick's terms, a sense of the indeterminacy of what the bounds and significance of the problem, the issue, the controversy is. Situations are not necessarily well-defined. Controversies are located in space and time. While a specific controversy or dispute might appear to be self-contained, it may form only a part of an ongoing dispersed series of negotiations, debates and disputes which are not. At the same time, the spatiality and temporality of a situation is in play. The question of what should be included as part of a situation, its history and future, its spatial dispersion, its temporal extension, is integral to what a situation is. And so it is with the financial crisis and its aftermath. There are certainly attempts to close down the situation, to frame it narrowly in terms of government debt, for example, or to blame it on very specific factors, such as bonus payments or speculation, for example, and that's certainly the case in the UK. There's an extensive anti-politics to the situation, and there's equally a danger of making a frame too great, framing everything within a political situation. It's the virtue, I think, of this initiative here, perhaps to keep the question of what the situation is open, to raise doubt, as Paolo would say, on what the significance of the events of 2007, 2008 and after are. Situations then are not single events. They're likely to mutate, take multiple forms, which may be, again echoing the theme of the last session, more or less visible. Secondly, situations are also spatially variable. As I was saying yesterday, there's a question about the geography of this situation. Sometimes it seems to me we're clearly talking about the politics of contemporary Anglo-American versions of capitalism, rather than capitalism in general. A lot of politics has to do with the specificity of political situations which are often framed in quite national terms. Thirdly, there's the question of what is known and by whom and how has come to be critical to the contemporary situation around finance and capitalism. And in response to this apparent lack of knowledge, a powerful political discourse which exists before the crisis and continues, as Paolo has said, is that we need more transparency. And I absolutely agree. I don't think we necessarily should be in favor of transparency. Transparency, after all, does not simply increase the amount we know anyway. It continually involves discretion. In other words, deliberately or not knowing things. So there's no need to make them transparent. Think of the lack of knowledge by financial institutions of the lives of those who live on precarious incomes and require loans on high interest. And compare this with the situation in which lenders know personally the circumstances of those to whom they lend. And transparency immediately raises the new questions about the production of information and knowledge that is made transparent. We discussed this in the last session as well. Transparency raises new issues about what is secret, about what has been made transparent. More interesting, it seems to me, are those initiatives which lead to different ways of opening out the question of what is known and not known and should be known. There's a long-standing concern within science and technology studies about the need to raise questions about the democratization of knowledge production. I don't think this is simple at all. But there's been a lot of work about how one might involve various publics in debates concerning matters such as the construction of nuclear power stations, the development of drugs, GM crop trials, and so forth. And over the last decade, there's been a growing range of experiments in public engagement and participation around the production of scientific knowledge. And while I wouldn't be uncritical about these initiatives, actually one would need to assess them in detail. The same, it seems to me, needs to occur around the production of knowledge about financial markets, a degree of experimentation in ways of knowing what goes on the inside. In the UK, one of the most innovative political movements over the last couple of years is called UK Uncut, which involves brief occupations, almost kind of flash mob occupations of stores and banks, which are said to be avoiding taxes through offshore operations, for example, and reinventing these locations temporarily into creches or libraries or places of public debate, opening up the question of the lack of knowledge in a different way. It's a kind of form of public critical accounting, you might say. Fourthly, a fourth feature of the current political situation, and again, this is a question we've heard a lot about, is the question of the opposition, of the distinction between the financial markets and the so-called real economy. I wonder whether this is really a helpful opposition. In a market, objects always exist in a mediated form, as commodities mediated by prices, but more equally bundled up with more or less accurate or misleading information about their properties and capacities. Materials never exist as mere materials. Services never exist as mere services. But capitalism with derivatives, to use Dick Bryan's term, does produce more and more levels of mediation, to be sure, mediations of mediations, which are increasingly difficult to track. Take, for example, a natural disaster such as a hurricane, which may have a quite dramatic impact on commodity prices in the short term. But the impact is not direct at all. It does not necessarily even happen when the first reports of the existence of the hurricane emerge on computer screens in commodity markets. Actually, the market responds to multiple sources of knowledge, multiple mediations, including the analyses of its own experts, atmospheric scientists, experts in insurance, and so forth. The difficulty is in tracking and tracing these multiple mediations and intervening in them. The autonomization of the market, the apparent decoupling of the market from the materiality of events, depends actually on a whole series of mediations, the kind of multiplication of mediations. It doesn't involve the absence of reality, but it's multiplication, if you like. Fifthly, certainly, of course, as we know, a certain ideology of the free market has been pervasive for the last 30 years ago or so in the Anglo-American universe, at least. But of course, we shouldn't imagine that this ideology describes markets as they operate in practice. Rather, actually, we've seen a proliferation of different ways of organizing markets in different countries and different sectors. Capitalism shows no signs of converging to a universal model. On the one hand, a vastly expanded range of entities has been made commensurable through the growth of derivatives, but one shouldn't confine a concern with the inventiveness of of economic forms to financial markets. There's also been novel forms of state intervention. If one is considering the political situation in Europe today, one would need to look at the decision now taken 20 years ago for the invention of a euro, the euro, a transnational currency, which is so central to European politics and has been incredibly problematic in decoupling a currency from national state institutions. And we could see also the increasing and often strange entanglement of the state in market forms. In the UK, this would include the quasi-marketization of public universities through the introduction of full-cost tuition fees, which is not actually a market. Most students will have to pay now £9,000, $15,000 through, in effect, deferred taxation. But it's certainly not an old model of the state either. It's rather perhaps the state trying to learn something from the financial markets, using the expected income stream from future graduates to maintain expenditure in the present. So rather than the opposition between state and market, the problem, perhaps today, as it always has been, is to engage with a concern with the proliferation of market forms, which are never quite as pure as they seem to be. So we need an attention to the continual entanglement of states and markets. It's an old point, but talking about states and markets as distinct things might be understood as a particular way of rendering the market non-political. And in thinking about capitalism, we need to return to that question of the state once again. Sixthly, social scientists have all too often viewed public controversies or political situations simply as the manifestation of existing or known political forces, interests, or struggles or dynamics. Thus, the specificity and novelty can be over-contextualized or over-theorized and advanced. In thinking about political situations, we need to think about the new actors and the new problems they generate. Again, this is a very old issue in social and political thought. How can we attend to the irreducibility and openness of politics? I think if one was to look at the political situation that has evolved since 2008, I would just flag very briefly three issues. One, as I've said, the way that the politics of finance today raises questions about the politics of knowledge. The other is the way in which, and this is very much a theme in this conference, the way in which the growth of finance raises questions about the politics of the future, of predictions of the future, and of our debt to future generations. And thirdly, it raises questions about the specificity of political situations in particular countries, in particular locations, which is all too often forgotten in thinking about capitalism in general. And finally, I'll conclude. There's a very traditional way of understanding the relation between the natural and social sciences and political controversies and situations. This is that the function of the natural and social sciences is to close down political controversies, to reduce disagreements, to be anti-political. Now, as we've known, this position was extensively critiqued. The task for critical theorists from the 60s and 70s was to save politics from too much depoliticization by science. And certainly economics has sometimes had the function of closing down political debate. It has had an anti-political function. But now I think we can see the relation between the natural and social sciences and politics in a different way. If one takes the example of climate change, one does not see natural scientists successfully closing down a political issue. Rather, the role of natural scientific research has been to open up a political issue, a controversy, a doubt, if you like, about a problem which we would not otherwise think about. likewise, in relation to the market, the problem should not be to limit politics by being scientifically correct or imagining that one will develop a correct analysis of the problem, or that one can grasp the dynamics of the system as a whole, but to keep the political character of the situation open. Graham Ward responded to me yesterday saying that all politics requires a vision of the future of a kingdom to come. Actually, I'm not so sure. Visions are important, no doubt, for some, but I'm actually more of a conservative, perhaps, or a conservative in the sense that of not projecting too far ahead. There's actually a lot happening, more diversity happening in the present than one might imagine. A lot of politics. Like the market, we need to be attentive to what is emerging now and to track it. I'll stop there, thanks.